All the way back in the ancient times of the Dreamcast, there existed Phantasy Star Online, PSO for short, an MMORPG based on the Phantasy Star series of games. It was surprisingly more popular than the developers' Sonic team expected. Then they ported it forward onto the GameCube, including the original game as Episode 1, and additional content as Episode 2. I grew up on this game, although I never played it online. But then one day, for some reason, they decided to take PSO and its assets and make Episode 3 completely different. So released Phantasy Star Online, Episode 3, Card Revolution, in 2003 and 2004. They took a hack-and-slash RPG, changed it to a card-based tactical game, and yeah, it got some mixed reception. I mean, it's one thing when a sequel comes out and it's bad or dumbed down, but this sequel is a different genre entirely. It was a pretty big surprise when I got it on release and found out it was completely different. But even then, despite the swerve, PSO Episode 3 is a unique gem of a game. It's got a really unique and cool battle system that you just can't really find in other games. So let's take a look at this black sheep and see why it has its fans, including myself. When you start playing, the game will give you some exposition on the lore of PSO, but in short, humanity lived on a planet called Coral, but expanded beyond the scope of it. Thus, they built pioneer ships to search out new worlds to inhabit. The ship Pioneer 1 was sent to the planet Raggle and tried to colonize it, which worked well for a bit. Then a mysterious explosion happened, monsters attacked people, and Pioneer 2 arrives to a mess, which your character sorts out in Episodes 1 and 2. 21 years later, Episode 3 takes place. Raggle still hasn't been colonized as the government of Pioneer 2 tries to exploit its resources. They somehow discovered card technology, which allows you to summon objects and monsters from cards, and you get to play through two separate but concurrent storylines. You have the hero side, or hunter story, who are employed by the government to research card technology and fight off the terrorist organization, the Arcs. Then you have the dark side, or Arcs themselves, who are sick of the government trying to exploit the planet, really wish Pioneer 2 would just colonize Raggle, and think cards are dumb. To properly play the game and understand the story, you have to play through both campaigns, seeing both sides of the conflict. It's a pretty good concept in my opinion. The execution, though, is a little lacking. If I had to point out my main issue, it would be that some of the characters can be too jovial. There are certainly some that take things seriously, but then you have a bunch that would rather talk about their relationship troubles or other hijinks. It's a little weird when you put them right next to each other. The tone can be a little all over the place. It's not to say the characters are bad, rather there are some that are pretty fun to talk to between missions or have interesting backstories. It just feels like some of them are in the wrong game when the plot tries to be serious. But I don't recommend this game for its story, but rather for its unique and interesting gameplay. PSO 3 is an asymmetrical card battle RPG thing that repurposes the assets of PSO 1 and 2 into something completely new. Those assets in question look pretty decent for a GameCube title. Of course they're going to have their rough edges during the time frame this was released, but all the characters and monster designs look good, if slightly polygonal in some cases. It works pretty well for the mechanical characters though. The music here is new, and there are some really good tracks here, very reminiscent of the original games. The best way I could describe it is that it's very sci-fi techno at times, but also orchestral and grand. So when you're in your home base, you'll have more sci-fi tracks, but then when you go down to Raggle, you'll get more natural music that still feels like it fits because it's all got the same orchestral feel. Also, there's this monotone voice that announces all the phases during combat. It's a little unnecessary, but I've grown attached to it over the years. Now into the gameplay, where the game gets really unique. PSO 3 is a tactics RPG where both sides use cards to defeat their opponent. Generally, you play a hunter versus an Arcs. What's neat is that the hunters will use cards to create equipment, such as weapons and shields, while the Arcs will use cards to create monsters to attack with. As a hunter, you'll equip weapons and kill monsters until you can attack the Arcs player directly, as they're generally defenseless themselves. Then as an Arcs, you'll summon monsters to attack the hunter, destroying their equipment, which also does incremental damage to them. Two different playstyles fighting against each other, both of which can be fun and powerful if you know how to play. I like how this kind of translates the traditional RPG combat of PSO 1 and 2 into cards. The original game essentially had a warrior, ranged fighter, and mage class system. So here, sword weapons are stronger but attack at one range, guns are weaker but can hit from a distance, and the stats generally deal poor melee damage but can deal a lot when a spell card is cast through them. This even translates to some of the monster cards, where monsters that would attack in groups in the previous game now power each other up when summoned together. Each turn starts with you rolling dice for action and defense points. With your action points, you can summon things with cards, move, and attack, or use action cards to hit the enemy even harder. They'll then have the chance to play defense cards using the points they rolled on their last turn. It's pretty simple to understand. What gets a bit more complex is optimal deck building. Each card has a cost to play, and you're only allowed to have 8 points of cost on the field. So while you could summon 2 4-point monsters, you can also summon 4 2-point monsters. So you need to think of how to balance what cards to put in your deck. Are 1-cost cards really worth it if they'll likely get destroyed in a single hit? Maybe you could use multiple weaker cards to get through the enemy's guard cards, or block them off as an Arcs player. You could also summon low-cost monsters further into the field. Is that 5-cost card worth it if it's hard to put into play, and a 4 or 3-cost card is more reliable? Then you have the characters themselves to consider. While you do make a character at the start of the game, it's just cosmetic and a holdover character created from PSO 1 and 2. In the actual battles, you pick from pre-established characters that have their own strengths and weaknesses. Some hunters deal more baseline damage, while others have a unique ability which gives them different potential playstyles. Some Arcs characters want to stay away, while others, like Indu, who's the best in the whole game, prefer to go into melee range, putting themselves in danger for the opportunity of dealing good damage. At any rate, at the end of each fight, you'll earn experience points, where leveling up makes it more likely you'll pull rarer cards, and you get the chance to pull cards from 1 to 4 packs, with your battle rating giving you better pulls. The more copies you get of the same card, the higher the chance of it evolving into a better card when you pull it again. And that's really it for the gameplay loop. Do a battle, get XP, get cards, make better decks. You can either play through the story modes, or you can play free battle, a mode accessible through the title screen that lets you play custom matches to grind, and is actually the only way to get certain cards. The gameplay is unique and pretty fun in my opinion, but as someone who's played this game a fair bit, it has its problems. Needless to say, the game can get repetitive, especially if you find a really good deck and just stick with the same strategy over and over again. Another issue which is to be expected in a deck builder is card balance. Some are just way more practical than others, so you may be excited to pull a rare card, only to realize it's not as useful as your commons. Some of the playable characters are also just not worth using when you consider some of the others in your lineup. Then we have what is more of an actual issue with the game, the AI. Sometimes you'll get into a match, and your opponent will just decide it doesn't like existing anymore, and make the worst play it can. I mean, hey, a win's a win, but it's not so great when you're playing the 2v2 match, and your partner decides to do this instead. This can also be the cause of some of the game's difficulty spikes, where amongst some easy or normal difficulty missions, there will be 1 or 2 that are just way harder. Though sometimes these missions are optional, but can come out of nowhere when you see just how much the leap is. Special mention to the penultimate final bosses of both routes, who really crank up the challenge. And while I'm on the topic of optional missions, I need to mention story progression. So each storyline has a series of missions which are the main quest line. Then you get additional missions for this section of the story by talking to other people around the hub. If you don't remember which mission is obviously the main one, or you're given 2, either one possibly being the main one, you may accidentally complete it and lock yourself out of doing the side missions for that section. It would have just been nice if they labeled which mission advanced the story. Then you also have the kind of weird way the game presents its story. If you complete a mission with a certain character, you'll sometimes get these comic panel cutscenes that explain more of the plot. They're usually pretty telegraphed with what character the game wants you to use, but sometimes you can use multiple characters and get different cutscenes depending on who you use, locking you out of seeing certain parts of the overall story. I'm guessing this is done for the sake of replay value, as there are also mutually exclusive side quest lines you can only do one of per playthrough. I just don't feel like PSO3 needed to hide its story across multiple playthroughs like this. Then, of course, we have the elephant in the room. This is Phantasy Star Online, but this was a GameCube title. Obviously, if you pick up a physical copy or emulate it, you won't be able to access all the systems that revolved around this aspect of the game. Now, I'm sure there are ways, as the original PSO games still have their own private servers and community, but it's something to consider when trying this out. But even with all these faults, I still think this game is worth trying. Of course, it won't appeal to everyone, and I'm definitely nostalgic for it, but PSO3 exists as something very unique. The asymmetrical battle system allows for diverse playstyles. The different cards can get pretty fun once you get some of the more interesting ones, and think about how to construct your deck with new strategies in mind. And even if the story has its hiccups, some of the characters and plotlines are pretty decent. I would be generally interested if a game came around that was inspired by this system, and tried to clone it. The core gameplay formula was really onto something here in my opinion. So if you want a cult classic deck builder RPG with the bit of charm that persists despite the online functionality being gone, go play Phantasy Star Online, Episode 3, Card Revolution. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like or comment. If you want to hear about more underappreciated games, subscribe to my channel for more content.